Hello, everybody. I'm Tommy Waller. I am a Christian Zionist, and I head the organization Hayovel, which is a volunteer organization that brings hundreds of volunteers to Israel every year to help and support the Jewish farmers in Judea and Samaria.
And I am Kimberly Troup. I am the U.S. Director of Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, and I am a Christian Zionist.
And I'm Sondra Oster Baras. I'm the director of the Israel Office of Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, and I am an Orthodox Jew. So welcome back, everyone, to our program, to those of you who have been with us each month as we discuss different issues. And of course, welcome to all of you who are new to this program. Today, our topic is interfaith marriage. And I will be presenting the Orthodox Jewish point of view. And we have two friends, Kim and Tommy, who will be presenting the Christian point of view. And their points of view usually have a lot in common, but they always have some differences as well. So Kim, why don't you tell us about how you see the Christian attitude towards interfaith marriage?
Okay, well, and I want to start out, first off, this is a really sensitive subject. So if you're watching this show and you're in an interfaith marriage or you're a child of an interfaith marriage, we're not here to judge or condemn you. But we are talking about a subject that the Bible, both the Christian Bible and the Jewish Bible, has some very concrete things that it says about it. So I think as Christians, as Jews, when we read the Bible and we follow our faith, we tend to take what the Bible says is black and white, and we live by those standards. So this is not a judgment. This is not condemning you in any way, but it is hopefully just sharing how we feel about it and how we struggle, because every one of us is human and every one of us are living every single day up to God's standards. So, I have some very personal experiences maybe with this idea and this concept of mixed marriages, and just how I had to guard my heart against it about not going into a mixed religion. And we're not talking mixed races, we're talking mixed religions, faiths. So I think race doesn't have really anything to do about it. Although, Sondra, I would kick it to you and say, what does the Bible say about it? How do you, as an Orthodox Jew, feel about it?
Okay, well, first of all, I wanted to just refer to two scriptures initially in the Hebrew scriptures that are really we see as the foundation for this whole idea. And the first one is in the book of Exodus, chapter 34. And both scriptures that I'm going to be referring to, one's in Exodus and one is in Deuteronomy, both are very, very similar. And that it starts out by, they're both speaking to the nation of Israel in anticipation of their entry into the land of Israel. Both of them warn against entering into any kind of a treaty with the nations there, the Canaanite nations in the land. And then in both places, we have this additional warning. In Exodus, it's 34, verse 16. And when you take wives from among their daughters for your sons, their daughters will lust after their gods and will cause your sons to lust after their God. So you have a definite situation here of this is a bad idea, because the daughter or son-in-law, whatever, of the other faith will influence the person of Israel to follow a different faith. And we have a similar thing in Deuteronomy 7, where it says, you shall not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take your daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from me to worship other gods. And I think this is really, where it's at. And Kim, I'm very happy that you noted that we don't have any problem with interracial marriage, because I don't know, race also is something that is constantly redefined. I don't know how people define it, but if we say race is, let's say, the color of your skin, okay? Judaism is 100% colorblind. It does not matter what you look like. It doesn't matter the color of your skin or the color of your hair or the color of your eyes. It does matter what you believe. And in Judaism, I would take that one step further, because Judaism is not just a faith, it is also a peoplehood. But unlike other peoplehoods where you're either born into it or not, Judaism does have an entry process, which includes conversion. Right. And that also tells you about how the peoplehood and the faith really come together in Judaism. So whereas in the Bible, it's clearly a faith-based issue. The warning against interfaith marriage is so that one spouse doesn't take the other spouse out of his faith. And in our case, we're concerned about the Jewish faith. But there is that option to become of the people, of the Jewish people, by adopting the faith, okay? And it goes together, peoplehood and faith. Now, of course, there are many, many Jews out there who are not committed to the Jewish faith. They're committed to peoplehood in one way or the other. And there's many Jews, especially in the United States today, who are completely assimilated, and that their Jewish identity is just like a footnote, or maybe something important to them, but they don't have a commitment to the continuity of Jewish peoplehood. So from a Jewish point of view, interfaith marriage challenges us in two very, very important places. One is faith. Is the non-Jewish spouse going to pull the Jewish spouse into a different faith or away from faith altogether? But the second thing is, when two people, a Jew and a non-Jew, marry, their children, will they be Jewish?
Right.
And that's not only a question of will they believe, because everybody's children ultimately make their own independent choices, whether they're going to continue in the faith of their parents and be as strict or as believing, that at some point is very, is very individual. But as a nation, as a community, we want to ensure that there's continuity of the people. And so that's also part of this intermarriage. It's not only interfaith marriage, it's interpeoplehood marriage.
For sure. The Christian Bible has some very strong scriptures about it as well. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 through 18. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial? Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God, as God said, I will make my dwelling among them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore, go out from the midst and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch no unclean thing. Then I will welcome you, and I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty. So I think this is probably quoting a little bit of that Exodus and Deuteronomy, but I think the idea is very much there. As Christians, we are definitely discouraged, and hopefully discouraging our children from what we call missionary dating. Going out and marrying someone who's not a Christian, hoping that they'll come to faith and hoping that they'll become a Christian. It's just a bad idea. I have a close friend who is a child of a mixed marriage, and her father is Jewish, her mother is Catholic, and I think I don't know the parents personally, so I can't say, but my assumption is, it's more of an identity rather than a faith. And so that's why, as a Jew and as a Catholic, they could marry interfaith and not have an issue. But the daughter, who married a friend of mine, she had a real identity crisis, and she grew up celebrating the Jewish holidays, celebrating the Christian holidays, and just kind of this mishmash of whatever. But when she got into college, she came to faith in Jesus and became a Christian and accepted Christ. And she went home and wanted to celebrate Hanukkah with her dad, because that was just their family tradition. And this was, how she wanted to connect with him. And he didn't want to have anything to do with her. And he didn't allow her to celebrate Hanukkah with him because she had made that choice to be Christian. And I don't know him, and I don't know where he's coming from. And he may be just coming from, you made your choice, don't mishmash the two together. But I know she was very hurt and confused by that. And I think that's the story that I hear over and over from anyone that I know who is a child of a mixed marriage, is there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of just identity crisis of who are they and which side do they fit in, and how do you make this all work together. So I think that's probably why the Bible is pretty strong about saying don't marry, don't intermarry, come together. For me personally, I was single until I was 26, and it started coming to Israel, or started working with Israel when I was 23. So I had 3 years that I was traveling to Israel every year, had all these Jewish friends who were constantly saying, man, what is your problem? Why are you not married? Who can we hook you up with? Who can we find for you? And man, you're in Israel, and boy, all these Israeli Jewish boys, whew, it was, I had to guard my heart and say, you know what? I'm not going to enter into a relationship, and I'm not going to let myself get attached emotionally to someone who is of the Jewish faith, because I think that would be, it would not be beneficial to me, and it would not be beneficial to them, and it just would be heartache on all sides. So I really had to guard my heart in that area as a single person, and just say, even though I love the Jewish people, I loved Israel, and there was a lot of, shall we say, fleshly, I don't know, there was some good looking IDF soldiers. What can I say? A man in uniform, you're single, you're there. Wow.
Yeah, behave yourself now.
I'm just being honest.
Remember who you are.
So that's where I come from. I do, Tommy, I want you to share, and kind of, because I know you're sitting there with bringing volunteers in, so I know this has got to be something that you're dealing with as well.
Yeah, if you're a Christian and you want to find a husband or wife, you have to come to Dayubel. Can I just put that plug? This plug.
Well, there's only one. You've had quite a number of marriages come out of your harvest.
Oh, yeah,
including some of your children, right?
Hey, we just had an announcement this week too, so it's it's big. Not with my family, but with some of our staff members. So yeah, it was great. No, but I it's interesting, the Jewish from the Jewish perspective. And I see this discussed a lot here, that which is worse. And I kind of want to kind of put this question out there to Sondra. Is it the persecution, or it's when the anti-Semitism is when people hate you enough to want to kill you, and then the assimilation comes when people love you to where they want to marry you. Right. So what is the what's the worst thing? I mean, because they're both obviously trying to take your identity, or you're losing, but it seems like to me that you're either in one position or another. Like there's a difficulty here, because you've got Jews that want to leave your religion because of persecution, and they did. There were obviously Jews that left because of persecution, and now you're having Jews leave because of this assimilation, this presentation from other religions, not just Christianity. I mean, we're talking about, I know here you have Jews going to India to find themselves, there's all kinds of assimilation going on. It's not just between Christianity and Judaism, and same with Christianity. We're losing a lot of our people with the age of information that's out there. People are watching YouTube for their spiritual journey. People are getting connected to all kinds of stuff that's really leading them away from their own identity. And I hear, that, but I just wanted to hear what you think is the greatest threat to the Jewish identity. Is it because it seems like that there are some rabbis that say without persecution, Jewish identity would have gone away a long time ago. That it's assimilation. That's
okay. Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but if I have to look back to Jewish history, I would say that there was something about the persecution that did. I don't know if it was the persecution. Let me put it this way. Okay. I'm not talking about the pogroms. I'm not talking about the murder. I'm not talking about the people that were out to actually destroy us. But on the other hand, the fact that we lived, for example, both in Europe and in the Muslim countries, we lived in societies where those host societies didn't want to have anything to do with us.
Right.
But they minimized the contact with us because of prejudice, because of anti-Semitism. There's no question that did us a favor. When that then led to persecution, that already was a problem. So I wouldn't say anti-Semitism is a good thing, but I would say the fact that for so many centuries we were living in cultures that did not want us to mix, of course, was a good thing. Today, though, no, there's no question, and I think also this is a huge difference. When you talk about anti-Semitism and persecution, the Jew really has no say in that. The Jew is passive, the Jew is a victim, and has to deal with it the best he can. When you're talking about assimilation, here the onus is on the Jew, because it is for every individual Jew, no matter where he lives, to make the decision, I am going to stick with my people. I am going to only marry a Jew. And this has to be a decision that, like you described yourself, Kim, you had to make a very definite decision that you are not dating any of these people. You're not going to let yourself be open to relationships with people that don't share your faith. And I think this is something that has to be done. And unfortunately, we're seeing skyrocketing numbers in the United States among Jews. Some people even talk about 70% intermarriage rates. Now, that figure, of course, is much lower and almost non-existent in the Orthodox Jewish community.
Right.
Because in the Orthodox Jewish community, we are living by a different set of rules. We are, of course, if you talk about Orthodox Jews in America, they're very loyal American citizens and they follow the rules and the laws of the United States, but they have an additional set of rules and they have an additional culture that sets them apart. So in that case, we're not relying on external forces like anti-Semitism to set us apart. And this, I believe, is what we're supposed to be. I mean, Balaam, when he cursed the we cursed and blessed and whatever, he tried to curse the Jewish people and he ended up, he could only bless them. One of the things he said, this is a nation that dwells alone. Now, I don't know if he said that as a blessing or as a curse, okay? But it's definitely something that we are supposed to be. And that doesn't mean we can't be friendly with everybody. And in fact, when I've spoken to people about intermarriage, and then people will accuse me, oh, you're prejudiced, you're a racist. You only like people that are like you. And I say, absolutely. I said, you can't say this about me. I spend most of my life talking to Christians. So my dearest friends are Christians. You can't tell me that I have a prejudice against Christians. But there's a huge difference between being good friends and socializing and, having wonderful conversation and marriage. Marriage is a whole different ballgame. And, I remember once I had two interesting encounters not that long ago. One, I have a very dear Christian friend whose son, she is Christian, she's a Christian Zionist and she loves Israel, and she raised her son to be a good Christian Zionist. Yep. And so he started coming to Israel a lot, and at some point met an Israeli, and they got married. Now, this friend of mine would both get together, and she initially, I remember when she wanted to tell me how distressed she is about this, but she didn't want to make it sound like she doesn't like Jews. Right. So she starts putting the situation before me. I said, don't worry. I said, I feel exactly the same. Now, I don't know her Jewish daughter-in-law, okay? But it pains me terribly just to know that a Jewish woman has married a non-Jewish man. And so in a way, in an ironic way, both of us were on the same exact page on this. She is a Christian, me as a Jew. Our friendship is solid. We love each other, but we are both equally pained by the fact that her nice Christian man marries a nice Jewish woman. And I'm sure they love each other. But, and this comes to the second thing. There was a few young people, there were a sister and a brother, and I'm very friendly with their grandmother. And their grandmother was very concerned because their granddaughter was about to marry a non-Jewish boy. And she said, to the grandchildren, go visit Sondra. And I said to the grandmother, I said, but, what am I going to do? She says, well, try to convince them not to marry each other. Well, of course, this is a lost cause. I'm just meeting these people for the first time. I'm going to say, no, you're crazy. Don't. But I did engage in a conversation. And it was the Christian woman who talked more. Mm. And she said, but we love each other. Right. And she, I think, came from a Baptist she was coming from a Christian Zionist home, no question, okay? Mm. And he had been raised in an Orthodox Jewish home, but his family was no longer Orthodox and he was not Orthodox, but he had a solid foundation. So I'm talking to two people who were raised in a very solid foundation in their faith, but they fell in love. And I said, but what are you doing with your children? You're going to have children. How are you going to raise them? We're going to give them a choice. I said, but what about peoplehood?
Yeah.
Will your children be Jewish? Well, no, by Jewish law, they won't be Jewish if the woman is not Jewish. And they said, well, we're going to give our children a choice. And I think you are not supposed to give your children a choice of what their national identity is or what their faith-based identity is. You're supposed to be giving them some solid grounding and foundation. If afterwards, now I'm sure we all know people who have made major changes in their lives, who've converted from one faith to another, or who have immigrated to a different country and totally become one with that country. Those are life-wrenching decisions.
Yes.
And an adult can make those decisions, but it was when their own decision, because they come to realize what they thought until now was wrong and they're going to move to something else. It's a very difficult process, but it's a legitimate process. But you have to give your children a solid foundation. Otherwise, you're sending them rudderless into the world.
Yes. I agree.
Right. And I think this is an attack in both, and I would say this, it's not just a Jewish problem. It's also a Christian problem.
Mhm.
It is, I think that we would agree that the issue here is not, is actually creating or educating people on who they are. And really running with that, building a foundation on why is it good to be a Christian? Why is it good to be a Christian? And sometimes I think that what I run into, especially here, is that a lot of times the whole presentation or the whole narrative has changed within the Christian Jewish community, because now, as Sondra, you hear us talk about the Jewish wannabes. We're all Jewish wannabes, and so there it creates this really environment for this kind of thing to happen. Whereas the Jewish people have a particular identity, and to the liberal world and the political world that we're in right now, and this ideology that wants to destroy the identity, especially where it concerns religion or God. What is your position? What is your place? And I think that this is the battle here, is that we have to recognize, and one of the things I think that we had to recognize, because you can be thrown off on this, that the Jewish people have a specific role to play in the redemption. Whether our disagreement about how that redemption takes place or whatever, the reality is that we're coming to and learning a lot as we walk this road together, but separate. Understanding that my role as this as part of the nations, and your roles as part of the Jewish community or the Jewish identity is critical in the redemption, even from Christianity's standpoint. And I would say this to the Christians: the verse that Yeshua would say over and over in the Gospels is, "This house shall be a house of prayer for all nations." I hear Jews saying that all the time. So this is a critical deal. All nations aren't some pot where we're just going to mix all the nations. They're going to be individual nations coming to Israel. There's going to be the Jewish nation, because they can't be intermixed with the nations. They're running the show. They're hosting the event. They're doing the things that God has called them to do. We have to recognize that. We have to say, we have to hold that as sacred, because this is God's order, not our order, not what makes us feel good. It's God's order. Because there's the same passage here with that, this is going to be a house of prayer for all nations. Also, Isaiah says to us that we're going to be part of this sons and daughters. We're going to have greater the nations that are attached themselves to Israel are going to be recognized by God as a very critical part of the whole plan. And I think that we have to understand that because Christianity, when we lost the replacement idea, then we begin to think that we're missing something. We're not missing something. We have a critical role to play in this whole process. So first of all, there's not a reason Christians that are coming here are looking for Jewish spouses or Jews looking for Christians or whatever, that deal. No, it really shouldn't be that because of the sanctity or the holiness of what we actually believe, because we both believe in the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, and the responsibility we have, both as Jews and Christians, is to keep these identities sanctified or separated or holy, so that we can carry out the mission, the real mission of God, and that's to save the world, to bring to bring good in the world, and to me, this is an exciting thing. There'll be people listening to this going, "Oh, this is terrible. They're talking. This is so racist sounding. This is so, so terrible that people can't just fall in love with who they want to follow." No, just like you started off the program with the whole Torah deal. If God had allowed all of the Canaanites and the Hittites and all the whole list of nations to assimilate with the Jewish people, if they didn't have a process of converting those women that wanted to come into if there wasn't a process here of those things joining themselves to the Jewish Israel identity, Israel would have been a footnote in history somewhere. I mean, the whole Jewish identity would have been gone a long time ago. This is a critical. If you are listening to this show and you believe in God, you need to walk in your identity. That identity is a biblical identity. It's not. I'm not saying be Buddhist if you're Buddhist. I'm saying, I'm saying be a Bible believer in the place where you're at. If you're Christian, follow Scripture according to the plan God has for you in that identity. And if you're a Jew, follow the identity that God has laid out. Return to the sanctification of God's name. Ezekiel 36 is whether you return to Israel or not return to Israel. Can Christians, are we allowed to say that? I say it all the time. This is something that's changed everything. Seeing Jews come to the mountains of Israel, come to Israel, has changed everything. Me allowing my children to marry Jews and diminish that identity or take away that identity would be a horrible thing in the testimony of what you are and what we are required to do in this right now in this generation.
What you're saying, Tom, is really interesting. I think of two things in that context. First of all, in the scriptural context, if we look at Genesis chapter 10, I believe, where we have the Tower of Babel. And there, basically, until that point in time, God was working on a completely different model. Okay, there were no different nations. There were families, and families had children, and and that's just how it went. No, it's Genesis 9. No, whatever. Is it?
It's after Noah, so it's
whatever. It's in there somewhere. Oh no, it's Genesis 11. Excuse me.
11, it's 11.
Genesis 11. Okay, so what happens? It's all one nation. Everyone speaks the same language, and it's just different families. And then they get together and they build this Tower of Babel. Now we don't have to go into a full study of what that is all about, but clearly God decided that model didn't work. Right. Okay, and so he how did he change that? He scrambled up the languages, right? So that. And from this came the nations. Until the Tower of Babel, there was one nation. And after the Tower of Babel, everyone spreads out, and there's different nations, and everybody gets their own piece of land. And I think basically what God is saying is, knowing what he knows about human nature, okay, knowing what he knows about what humankind has done in the first 10 chapters of Genesis, he says the one nation thing won't work. Okay, we got to go into different nations, and So that's chapter 11. In chapter 12, Abraham appears, and we have for the first time the promise or the identity, the way you put it, Tommy, the identity of the Jewish people being set forth for the first time through the promises to Abraham. So God chose this system because he believed this is the system that's going to work. And he set aside the Jewish people with their role and their as a vehicle to bring God's word to this earth. And Christianity was born out of, Judaism. I mean, we're different religions. We Christianity changed things a bit, but the fact of the matter is, it was only through the Jewish people that the Hebrew scriptures reached the world.
Right.
And then the Christians developed their own scriptures to add to it. But, this was part of our identity. So like you say, Tommy, we certainly don't want to dilute that, in any way. And the other thing is, like, what you're saying now about how today we see things, we understand it in a way we didn't before. And what I find amazing is basically that is a Christian awakening. Because the Jewish awakening as to the need to preserve our identity has been with us for thousands of years. It's in the scriptures, and we have just developed that since the scriptures throughout our thousands of years, and that includes good times and bad. Right. It was one of the most fundamental principles in Jewish life. You don't marry a non-Jew. And unfortunately, that has broken down only in the last, in a serious way, I would say in the last 100 years. And in a really serious way in the last 40 years, okay? I would say when I was growing up in the United States in the 1960s and the 1970s, it was still an absolute consensus among all Jews, whether you were Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, or unaffiliated. All Jews agreed intermarriage is a bad thing, okay? And that has changed. And I think that's one of the most distressing things, where today we have rabbis who are cooperating with pastors together to marry a couple. You have rabbis that are marrying couples, that one is Christian and one is Jewish, or also conversion. I believe Judaism gives the ability to convert to Judaism, as Christianity, and you don't necessarily use the word conversion, but it's the same idea. You take what you did before, you throw it in the garbage, and you adopt a whole new system of belief. But I think we will all agree that that's something that has to be sincere.
Yes.
And it has to be as a result of real serious study, soul searching, and deciding this is my new faith. But you have today conversions being performed wholesale. You've got a couple that want to get married, and so they want to please a parent or a grandparent or something. So they say, okay, so the other one will convert, whichever religion they choose. Okay. And they go to a rabbi or they go to a pastor and will say, okay, 3 sprinkles and you're whatever. Okay. Now, from both sides, we are not.
I thought that
seriously.
Because I always thought that Ruth was the Christian and Boaz was the Jew. I thought that was worked perfectly together. That
Right.
I hear Christians saying that all the time, that your people are my people and
Right.
your God is my God. You're saying that she actually converted? This is big news.
Clear.
I think.
So what about Rahab? Let's talk about Rahab and Ruth.
Okay. So Ruth, let's start with Ruth. First of all, there's no question the conversion process we have today with rabbinical courts is a much more not recent, it's probably a few thousand years old, but it doesn't go back as far back as Ruth, okay? But first of all, we have 2 systems with Ruth. Ruth, when she first comes with Naomi, she says, your God is my God. Your people are my people. These are 2 of the most fundamental elements. And in fact, when people go back and say, what is the element, not the technicalities, what are the important foundational elements of conversion? It is those 2 elements. Your God is my God. Your people is my people. So when a Christian comes and says to a Jew, your God is my God, they don't really mean it in the same way that Ruth meant it, or that what we're saying. In other words, we can all say we believe in the God of Israel. But as I say to many of my Christian friends, and sometimes I just scratch my head and didn't say anything, but when someone said we believe in the same God, I always ask myself, but my God doesn't have a son. Okay, so I can say in general, we all believe in the one God who created the universe.
But he does have children, though. So
What?
he has children. You say he doesn't have a son, but he has children. So
Well, he doesn't
because
have a
you're the
divine
children of
son.
God.
He has
So,
figurative
now
children.
we just lost you. Now we've offended all the Christians and the Jews. So just want to get that out.
Okay. Fine. No, but that's my point. In other words, it's not enough to say we all believe in the one God of the universe, the one God who created the universe. That all three monotheistic religions, including Islam, can say that. We believe in one God who created the universe. Okay. But if you go down from there and you start getting to other details, there's real differences between Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and all the other ones.
Right.
So for that's Ruth, when she said that, and don't forget, she was coming from Moab. She wasn't a Christian. She was coming from Moab. She was coming from a society that prayed to Chemosh, who was a pagan god. So, she adopted the God of Israel. That was a whole heart change. And she said that before she ever married Boaz. Okay. But I will tell you also that there's a whole procedure that you see towards the end of the book of Ruth where Boaz goes to the gates of the city. And the gates of the city are, anyone who knows anything about biblical history, gates of the city is a combination of the courts and the city council. Right. That's where the seat of government was. So that is a process that we see as being not only approving the marriage and figuring out if Boaz is the right one to do this levirate marriage kind of thing, but that it was also an official process that welcomed Ruth into the Jewish people. So it wasn't enough that she says, my people are your people, your people are my people, your God is my God, but she had to go through this official process, which takes place in the gates of the city. Okay. Rahab also. Now we have absolutely no details about how she came into the Jewish people in the Bible. Okay. Now here, by the way, the Christian and Jewish scriptures diverge. But what we have from chapter 2 in the book of Joshua, here's this woman in her home, minding her own business, and along come these two guys who are Israelites and are coming to spy the land, and they come into her house. She's actually a prostitute. She is certainly not one of the highest levels of society, right? And then what does she say? She says, I know how God helped you, and he split the Red Sea, and he helped you defeat all those nations that came against you. Her statement of faith is one of the most phenomenal statements of faith of any non-Jewish person in the Bible. It's just amazing. Now Christian tradition has her. I don't know who she marries under Christian tradition. I can't remember somebody, but she has.
Well, she's a grandmother or great grandmother of King David. So she's in the lineage of
we
King
don't
David.
do that. We don't have her in there. We have her Jewish tradition has her marrying Joshua.
Oh.
And she becomes a great grandmother of Jeremiah. So that's a slight difference. But in both cases, this is a woman who her statement of faith is so profound that whoever it is she married within the Jewish people, she married somebody. But again, her statement of faith precedes any kind of romantic or marriage relationship.
I think it does go back, and obviously I was alluding to the Ruth story because I think that Christianity, it seems like one of the first things that we kind of that's attractive to us to find somebody that's not Jewish now, attaching themselves. But Isaiah 56 does say that. I mean, it says that that the stranger or the foreigner in verse 3 who has joined himself to Hashem, who has joined himself to the Lord. And I think that this is a critical part. It's not like that. What you're saying is that Christianity needs to serve a different God, and I know you're not saying that, or a different version of God, but we really have to move and attach ourselves to the same, to be separate, but to still attach ourselves to the God of Israel, because in the end, and Isaiah speaks a lot to the foreigner or the one who are the nations, and I love that the passage in what is it, Isaiah 52, how beautiful upon the mountains in verse 7 are the feet of him who brings good news, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. and your watchmen shall lift up their voices. And it goes on to talk about that we will see eye to eye when the Lord brings back Zion, which is what he's doing right now. Break forth into singing, into joy, into joy, sing together. There's going to be a time, I believe, that we're going to do things. We're going to sing together. We're going to worship together. It's a house of prayer for all nations in this. Isaiah is trying to share with us. And there's a lot of things we can do together, but it's not that we have to marry each other. We're not doing it assimilating with each other. All of these amazing miracles that God's doing in the world right now is happening in our own separate place.
Amen.
And it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It is a beautiful thing. It is how beautiful are the feet. I look at these 70 volunteers that are here right now. They have beautiful feet. I tell them all the time, you guys got beautiful feet. You're coming here on the mountains of Israel. You got beautiful feet. And I think that it's wonderful when the Jewish people recognize how beautiful those feet are. Yeah, I don't know. You don't marry a person because they have beautiful feet. You marry, but you can't appreciate beautiful feet.
Yeah.
And I think that's a blessing. So I really enjoyed this very much. And I think it does. We have to somehow within the Christian community, even though we are really amazed at what the Jewish people are doing right now, we also need to understand our identity in this move of God. And this is so important for us to stay separate. Again, I'd say, just like what Kim said in the beginning of the show, we're certainly not, if you're married, stay married. Nobody here is saying if you've married a Jewish person and you're Christian or whatever, your marriage is holy. And it's a deal. If you've made the decision to do that right now, but the place of staying separate, of being purposeful and staying separate, is a very important thing, I think, within both of our communities.
I think it just all boils down to identity, and just having that strong identity within ourselves, and knowing as you're walking this road and as you're loving Israel, it doesn't mean that we should intermarry on either side. So we love you guys, and we just love that people are coming together and that we can sit here and have this conversation and not get mad at one another. And hopefully it will bring some,
at least not on air anyway,
healing, to anybody that's watching and that has questions about this, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, it was wonderful to see you all again today, and stay tuned for our next program. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.